When I animate cameras inside of After Effects, I do so using a very thought out approach. I like to think of it like organizing an actual shoot in the real world. See, if you don't have a shot list or you don't have a plan for each scene, it's very hard to come away with anything usable. The same goes for animating cameras inside of After Effects. So let's take a look. If we look at our project here, I'm going to go ahead and press play in my preview panel so you can see the animation that's already been created. If you are unsure how to create this, definitely check out the previous video on positioning layers in 3D space. Now I'll press the space bar here to stop playback because I want to animate a camera that moves from this side to this side. But before I do that, I just kind of want to show you one of the camera options that we have with the camera that's currently in the scene. So whenever you have a camera in a project, you can select that layer and just open up its options. And if you don't have transform options open, open its transform options. Because if you notice on this camera, I have a point of interest and I have a position. The point of interest controls where the camera is looking, and the position actually controls where the camera is positioned in 3D space. Now, in order to better see this, I'm going to change my view here from active camera to custom view 1. See, in custom view 1, I can see this camera positioned off to the side. So I'm going to press the comma key to zoom out here and press the space bar to grab my hand tool and reposition. So see, I have the axis handles, the control handles. I want to move this camera a little closer to my scene. So if I hover over the Z axis, the blue one, and I click and drag, notice the point of interest moves with the camera. Well, what if I want the point of interest to actually stay in its place? Well, I can Command Z to undo that last move, hover over the Z axis handle, and I'll hold down the Command key or Control on Windows. And then when you go ahead and click and drag on the Z axis, notice now my point of interest stays in place. That's fine for this Z move, but it really gets interesting when you start orbiting around. To see what that looks like, let's change our view from one view to two views. So on the left view, I want to switch that to custom view 1. And on the right view, I'll go ahead and switch that to the active camera so we can see what the camera's looking at. I'll press the space bar and just kind of reframe this here. So now with my camera selected, I'm going to select custom view 1 here and zoom out. And I'll click back on my camera here. And maybe I'll zoom in a little bit further so you can better see what's going on here. And if I hover over this red handle, that's my X axis handle, and I can hold down the Command key again. And when I click and drag, now I'll orbit around that point of interest. And that's pretty darn cool. But notice as I'm orbiting around here, it's not like I'm adjusting an orbit control here with either one of these options. So a lot of times when I animate cameras, I'll actually animate with a one-node camera and use parenting to gain better control over the scene. So to do that, let's go ahead and select camera 1 and just press delete. So I want to go to my right view here, this active camera view, and I'll switch my view back to one view. Let's add a camera into the scene. Go up under layer and choose new camera. But this time, I don't want a 2-node camera, I want a 1-node camera. This has no point of interest. We can use the 50mm preset. Just go ahead and click OK. So now with my 1-node camera, notice my view hasn't changed because it's staying this dead-on front view. So now let's add a null. I'll go to Layer, New, Null Object. Notice my null is positioned dead center in the middle of the scene. That's great. What I want to do is go ahead and make the camera the child of the null. So I'll click on the pick whip in the parent column here and point it at the null. So now null 1 is controlling the camera. So let's rename layer 1. Click on layer 1, press return, and we'll call this cam control. So the nice thing about this control, if I press R to open up the rotation, I can rotate things, but you notice this null doesn't actually exist in 3D space yet. So here, let's enable 3D. So now, if I go ahead and rotate on the Y, notice I'm rotating around the scene, which is exactly what I want. But I want to actually be very precise in how I'm moving around the scene. So let's undo this. And I want to go ahead and position my null object over here on this corner because that's where I want the camera to actually rotate around. So Let's move the null here. I'll press P to open up the position, and we want to move it all the way to the right side. So let's go ahead and just move it 1280. So now it's over here, but I want my camera to be back over there, right? So I'll go to my camera and I'll press P to open up its position. In order to slide this back, I can go ahead and just drag it back to the left, and half of 1280 is 640. So I'll do minus 640. And now I'm framed up perfectly well for this individual shot. In order to create this rotation, I'm going to actually keyframe the position of this camera and the orbit of my cam control. So let's move our current time indicator to about 112 and add a keyframe for the position of camera 1. And then for the cam control, let's select that and press R and add a keyframe for the Y rotation. Now let's move to around 212, which is 1 full second here, and we'll change the Y rotation. Click and drag to the left until you get to about -90. And now we need to actually move the position of the camera. So let's have it move a full 1280 to the right. So here, if I click on this, I can just right arrow and I can say plus 1280. And when I press enter, now it's actually moved over a full 1280 pixels, and it did the math and it figured out, hey, that's 640 on the positive. So now when I move around here, you can see I've got this perfectly aligned, snapped rotation. And if I really wanted to make this fancy, what I would do is actually animate the camera moving back a little bit before this rotation. So here, let's select our camera position here. I'll move my current time indicator over 112 and click on position. So both keyframes are selected. And now we'll just move back on the Z axis. And since both keyframes were selected, now when I go ahead and rotate, it'll stay at this value for the Z axis. So here, now we can move our current time indicator back to 1 second and zoom back in to around -1777. So here at the beginning, nothing's happening. Our logo slides in, our camera moves back, it orbits around, and then here we can zoom back out again. So -1777, boom, and we're all set. Now, if you see this slight drift that's happening, that's that keyframe interpolation thing. So we can highlight all these keyframes, right-click, go to keyframe interpolation, and just tell spatial to be linear. So now when I click OK, you can see the camera's going to move back, orbit around, and then move forward. And of course, if you want to keep polishing this, I'd suggest highlighting all these keyframes and pressing F9 and adjusting the ease in and out of your rotation. But I hope you can see how quickly you can actually move through a scene and create camera animation if you just take a little bit of time and think about what you're doing before you create the animation. Then you can be very methodical and even mathematical in your approach to animating cameras.